Titanic, 1912. The Titanic project was a manifestation of the grandeur and technology of the early 20th century. Its construction was undertaken by the Harland and Wolff Company, with the White Star Line as the client. The ship was equipped with the most modern safety features, such as watertight compartments designed to prevent flooding. However, one of the key mistakes was the lack of sufficient lifeboats. Despite having more than 2,200 people on board, the Titanic only had 20 lifeboats, enough for only 1,178 people, which was only half of the total number of passengers and crew. Moreover, the human factor played an important role. Captain Smith, despite his many years of experience, showed excessive confidence in the safety of the vessel. He did not properly respond to warnings about dangerous icebergs coming from other ships. At the time of the collision with the iceberg, the Titanic was traveling at a speed of about 22 knots, despite warnings of ice in the area. This decision, made based on an overconfidence that the ship could not sink, proved fatal for more than 1,500 people who perished as a result of the disaster. After the tragedy, the Titanic became a symbol of unwarranted self-confidence in technological safety, as well as an example of how important a responsible approach to planning and adherence to safety standards is. Chernobyl disaster, 1986. The Chernobyl disaster became not only one of the most destructive man-made catastrophes, but also a catalyst for significant changes in the field of nuclear energy. The incident occurred as a result of an unauthorized experiment conducted in the fourth reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The test, aimed at improving safety in the event of a power outage, led to a massive explosion that destroyed the reactor and released enormous amounts of radiation. The error lay not only in incorrect calculations and underestimating risks, but also in ignoring standard safety protocols that should have prevented such tests. Moreover, the reactor that was subjected to the tests had serious design flaws, which were known to engineers and operators. However, their requests for maintenance were ignored. After the catastrophe, the Soviet government and local authorities concealed the scale of the tragedy for a long time, which only exacerbated the consequences. The radioactive cloud that spread across Europe affected dozens of countries, and the long-term health and ecological impacts are still felt today. Chernobyl became a vivid example of how negligence, unpreparedness for unforeseen situations, and ignoring deviations from the norm can lead to catastrophic consequences for the entire world. Fall of the Roman Empire. These problems, compounded by the crisis of the 3rd century, led to the Roman Empire's inability to cope with external threats. In 476 AD, when the last Roman emperor was overthrown, the empire in its western region finally fell, giving way to new barbarian states. This event marked a significant moment in history, symbolizing the end of the ancient civilization and the beginning of a new era, the Middle Ages. The Roman Empire, which reached its peak in the 1–2 and centuries AD, long remained a model of political and military power. However, starting in the 3rd century, the empire faced internal problems that were the result of a series of poor decisions. One of these was the involvement of barbarian tribes in the Roman army, which, at first glance, might have seemed a logical step. The external threat from the Huns and other peoples forced Rome to recruit mercenaries and barbarians. However, this led to a weakening of the army and a deterioration in combat readiness, as many barbarians served in the army only for their own benefit and were not loyal to Rome. Political decisions of that time also played a role in the fall of the empire. Administrative fragmentation, corruption among high-ranking officials, and political instability became serious problems for Rome. Moreover, the economy began to degrade due to rising taxes, external trade, and the decline of agriculture. Instead of addressing internal issues, Roman rulers often used external wars as a way to divert attention from internal crises. These problems, compounded by the crisis of the 3rd century, led to the Roman Empire's inability to cope with external threats. In 476 AD, when the last Roman emperor was overthrown, the empire in its western region finally fell, giving way to new barbarian states. This event marked a significant moment in history, symbolizing the end of the ancient civilization and the beginning of a new era, the Middle Ages. World War II. Attack on the Soviet Union, 1941. The attack on the Soviet Union, known as Operation Barbarossa, was one of the most ambitious and ill-considered strategies in the history of World War II. Hitler, deciding to attack the Soviet Union, set several goals: the destruction of communist ideology, the seizure of vital resources such as oil and grain, and the creation of living space for the German nation. However, this plan turned out to be a strategic mistake. At the time the operation began, Germany was already embroiled in war on the Western Front, and resources in the East were limited. Moreover, Hitler underestimated the resilience of the Soviet people and the strength of the Red Army. Additionally, Germany did not take into account the complexities of winter warfare, as well as the vast distances that required incredible efforts from German troops. The attack on the USSR also led to a frontal war that intensified as the troops advanced, and the Soviet army, despite initial heavy losses, managed to hold out and even turn the war into an offensive. Operation Barbarossa ended with catastrophic consequences for Nazi Germany and ultimately led to its defeat. Collapse of Lehman Brothers, 2008. The collapse of Lehman Brothers was a turning point in the global financial crisis of 2008. Initially, Lehman Brothers was one of the largest investment banks, engaged in high-risk operations such as investing in mortgage loans and derivatives. However, when housing prices began to fall and mortgage loans became increasingly problematic, the bank found itself in a situation where its assets were worth significantly less than its liabilities. The main error of Lehman Brothers lay in its excessive exposure to the real estate market and the lack of proper asset diversification. As many other banks also held high risks, their financial losses triggered a chain reaction that affected the entire global economy. The collapse of Lehman Brothers became a symbol of the financial crisis, which led to mass layoffs, reduced consumer spending, and a deep economic downturn. This crisis demonstrated how insufficient control over financial risks and the lack of effective regulation can lead to global consequences. Collapse of Lehman Brothers, 2008. The collapse of Lehman Brothers was a turning point in the global financial crisis of 2008. Initially, Lehman Brothers was one of the largest investment banks, engaged in high-risk operations such as investing in mortgage loans and derivatives. However, when housing prices began to fall and mortgage loans became increasingly problematic, the bank found itself in a situation where its assets were worth significantly less than its liabilities. The main error of Lehman Brothers lay in its excessive exposure to the real estate market and the lack of proper asset diversification. As many other banks also held high risks, their financial losses triggered a chain reaction that affected the entire global economy. The collapse of Lehman Brothers became a symbol of the financial crisis, which led to mass layoffs, reduced consumer spending, and a deep economic downturn. This crisis demonstrated how insufficient control over financial risks and the lack of effective regulation can lead to global consequences. Decision on nuclear tests in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945. The question of using atomic bombs against Japan in 1945 raises many questions and remains a subject of heated debate. Although the decision to use the atomic bomb was made in the context of a desire to end the war and avoid additional casualties among American soldiers, the consequences of this step were catastrophic. As a result of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hundreds of thousands of people died, and those who survived faced long-term consequences of radiation exposure. This act not only became decisive in the context of ending World War II, but also marked the beginning of a new era of nuclear weapons, which in turn became a cause of the Cold War. The fact that the decision to launch atomic strikes was made without considering humanitarian consequences became an important lesson for future generations. The nuclear threat that arose after these events continued to remain at the center of global political and military discussions. New York Black Thursday, 1929. Black Thursday became a lesson for the entire world about the importance of caution in economic matters for both investors and governments, especially when dealing with financial markets that can easily get out of control. New York Black Thursday, 1929. The stock market crash of 1929 was not a coincidence. It was the result of excessive speculation and an overheated economy, where investors began to buy stocks without any understanding of the real value of companies. As a result, at the peak of the stock market, stocks became significantly overvalued. When selling began to avoid losses, panic ensued, and the market crashed. This led to the Great Depression, one of the most severe economic periods in history. Black Thursday became a lesson for the entire world about the importance of caution in economic matters for both investors and governments, especially when dealing with financial markets that can easily get out of control. Of course, here's a more detailed text with descriptions of each case. Fukushima disaster, 2011. In March 2011, one of the most devastating natural disasters in Japan's history occurred. A powerful earthquake with a magnitude of 9.0 and the subsequent tsunami that struck the country's coast. These events caused a disaster at the Fukushima 1 NPP, where explosions occurred in 3 of the 6 reactors, leading to hydrogen explosions and radiation leaks. This incident became one of the largest technological catastrophes of the 20th and 21st centuries, significantly affecting nuclear energy policies worldwide. The main error that led to the disaster was the underestimation of the risks of natural disasters. The nuclear power plant was not adequately protected against hazards, such as earthquakes and tsunamis, despite Japan being in a zone of high seismic activity. Additionally, the reactor cooling systems designed to prevent overheating proved ineffective under catastrophic conditions, exacerbating the consequences of the disaster. This incident once again called into question the safety of nuclear power plants, especially in regions with high seismic activity. In response to the incident, various countries began to review their nuclear safety programs and strengthen existing protective measures. Air France Flight 447, 2009. The tragedy of Air France Flight 447, which crashed in the Atlantic Ocean in June 2009, claimed the lives of all 228 people on board. The aircraft, flying from Rio de Janeiro to Paris, lost contact with air traffic controllers and was later found in the ocean. The main causes of the disaster were several factors: technical failures and errors in crew actions, which were, in turn, related to the mismatch between pilot training and the ability to respond in difficult conditions. One of the causes of the accident was a malfunction of the speed sensors, which led to the loss of flight speed data. The pilots were unable to correctly interpret the situation, resulting in an error in aircraft control. This tragic event served as an important lesson in aviation and highlighted the need for improving pilot training, as well as updating aviation technologies to enhance the accuracy of data provided to the crew in unstable flight conditions. Melbourne Pandemic, 2009. In 2009, the world faced a global pandemic of swine flu caused by the H1N1 virus. The epidemic, which began in Mexico, quickly spread around the world, affecting countries and continents. Initially, Many authorities underestimated the seriousness of the threat, leading to a shortage of medical resources and delayed response measures. In some countries, attempts were made to minimize panic, which, in turn, slowed the implementation of effective protective measures. The pandemic demonstrated that many countries were unprepared for such widespread epidemics. The lack of medical resources, the inability to quickly adapt healthcare systems, and low levels of coordination between states led to a large number of illnesses and deaths. This event prompted the global community to review strategies for dealing with pandemics and to create more effective systems for monitoring, rapid response, and treatment. Bhopal disaster, 1984. On December 2nd, 1984, one of the most devastating technological disasters in history occurred in the Indian city of Bhopal. A toxic gas leak occurred at the Union Carbide chemical plant, releasing methyl isocyanate, which resulted in the deaths of over 3,000 people, while tens of thousands suffered severe injuries. Many of them experienced poisoning, respiratory organ damage, and other long-term consequences of exposure to toxic substances. The main cause of the disaster was negligence regarding safety requirements, inadequate employee training, and equipment malfunctions. The catastrophe highlighted the importance of adhering to strict safety measures when producing chemical and petrochemical products. Subsequently, this event led to tighter standards for occupational health and environmental safety, as well as increased attention to corporate responsibility and strict penalties for environmental crimes. Challenger Incident, 1986. The disaster of the Space Shuttle Challenger occurred on January 28, 1986, when the rocket exploded 73 seconds after launch, claiming the lives of all 7 crew members. The cause of the tragedy was a failure of the seals in the solid rocket boosters, which could not withstand the low temperatures on the day of launch. This led to gas leakage and the explosion of the rocket. The mistake was underestimating the impact of extreme weather conditions on the launch, as well as insufficient communication between engineers and NASA management. Specialists had predicted possible problems with the seals, but these warnings were not adequately addressed. The Challenger incident served as a lesson in the necessity of considering all risks in high-stakes operations and demonstrated how important accurate and open communication is between engineers, managers, and operational personnel. Chicago Berg Nuclear Power Plant Incident, 1970s. Although the accident at the Chicago nuclear power plant in the 1970s did not receive as much attention as Chernobyl or Fukushima, it significantly influenced the development of nuclear energy in the United States. During an operational check at one of the plant's reactors, a radiation leak occurred. This incident was kept hidden from the public for a long time, contributing to a decline in trust in the safety of nuclear energy. It later became clear that the accident revealed serious deficiencies in the safety systems of nuclear power plants and in the approach to informing the public about potential risks. This catastrophe led to increased oversight and mandatory improvements in safety and accountability systems at nuclear power plants in the United States, as well as a review of nuclear energy standards in other countries. Flooding in the Netherlands, 1953. On February 6, 1953, the Netherlands experienced one of the most devastating natural disasters in its history when a powerful storm accompanied by strong winds led to the destruction of dikes and flooding significant areas in the south and west of the country. As a result of this disaster, more than 1,800 people died, thousands were left homeless, and a significant portion of agricultural land was destroyed. The catastrophe demonstrated the vulnerability of the Netherlands, a country where much of the territory is located below sea level, to natural disasters. This led to the creation of more modern and resilient flood protection systems. including a complex of dikes, locks, and protective structures known as the Delta Works. These systems are still in operation today, ensuring the safety of millions of people in the country's coastal areas. Each of these events demonstrated how errors in management, lack of preparedness, or underestimation of risks can lead to catastrophic consequences. They served as important lessons and became catalysts for change in various fields, from nuclear energy to medicine and ecology.